Hello everyone, today this is going to be the first of a new series. It's sort of discussion video style based. Some of you historically minded subscribers might guess what or whom has inspired this particular series of ship chat. It's just ship chat. There's no plural. It's just a ship chat. We'll take it one at a time. Sort of thing, where I can be a bit more critical and expressive with regard to thoughts of ships, and I'm going to talk about the real life impetus behind them, as well as then the sort of the in-universe explanations and my thoughts on it. And I'll cover ships that I've already covered, but in a different way, in a different lens, and I think you'll come to appreciate that, or at least I hope you enjoy it. So today we're going to be looking at the Constellation class. So a Constellation class is built. So originally you had the model in Andrew Probert and Rick Sternbach. It was all the yellow parts. Apparently built from anime kits, which is quite interesting. But it's an interesting combination. It's not quite a kit bash in certainly how I would judge a kit bash. A kit bash, I think, involves bashing two different classes together. This is just using Constitution parts in the same way a Miranda isn't a kit bash. It's just a reconfiguration. And then that was then made into the larger 4-foot studio miniature by Greg Jane. Now, many people aware the story that it actually originally in the battle it was going to be a Constitution class, and thank goodness that they changed that. Now apparently it was because it was too complicated to film the Constitution miniature for whatever reason, but thank Lord that they didn't do that, because that would have been so boring. Something we've seen a million times. We really get something new here and nice. So I mean that's the impetus of its design, and it's interesting, with any of these designs, is they do have that cobbled together look, but it's become part of the aesthetic in many a way, and there's a bit of charm to that. In universe, it was during the 70s and 80s. The Klingons had a bit of a fondness for testing Starfleet's reactions along the border. They really enjoyed sending their ships up, and Klingon ships, because of their configuration, had generally better acceleration, so they were able to get up to speed very fast. And testing Starfleet's reactions. So they had to come up with a solution to this, and they were doing their rebuild of the Constitution at the time. So they took that and some of the Miranda parts as well to create the Constellation class, which was the sort of first 4-nacelled class. And on one level, it's pretty impressive for a first attempt. On another level, it's quite rough around the edges, which we'll get into. There's certain issues sort of inherent to a 4-nacelle design. The point of a 4-nacelle design is to really, you can sustain higher speeds for longer because you've got the nacelles to take the burden. So that's very good and it's very handy. Unfortunately, there are other things that you trade off for that. One thing you trade off for is maneuverability. Turning the Constellation at warp is not easy. You really have to pitch and yaw like a rudder, whereas other ships can bank, and other ships can even make hard turns. Your 3-nacelled ships can make hard turns, so it's not the most agile vessel, although it's not too terrible at impulse. But again, it has a similar problem where the impulse engines are mounted. And again, this is not necessarily part of being a 4-nacelle design, but you're much more vulnerable to it. And that is, if you look at the mounting of the 4 impulse units on the back, you can see where they are sort of relative to the nacelle axis. So what that really means is it again sees very similar problems with maneuverability. They're closer to the hull, so have less angle of torque on the ship, because they're closer to the main hull, so there's not as significant a angular push. And then the second issue is the nacelles are in the way, because there's a lot of them. So what that really means is you can't steer them at an angle, because you'll blast your nacelles, which are pretty delicate pieces of equipment, with hot plasma, which isn't dreadfully convenient. So again, it's sort of limited to really four directions, four planes of movement, which isn't dreadfully convenient. But equally, they trade this off. They knew what they were getting with this trade-off. The other problem with this design from the get-go, and part of the reason for its very unique hull shape, is its engine. So being the first four-nacelled ship, it had to have quite a substantial engine, and this was really Starfleet's first time working with such a power unit. And the issue with that, as you can imagine, was they didn't make a particularly efficient engine, and it was quite a large engine, which is why it has this dreadfully thick saucer, and that kind of also impedes upon its maneuverability, because it's so front heavy. There's a lot of mass back there, and you can see on the later Cheyenne class, they've solved that problem of of reactor size, and you can get it in there at a reasonable size. But here they've had to take a very large engine, put it in there without having a dedicated secondary hull, and the result is a very thick saucer section, which is quite ugly. It's not the most attractive element of the ship. Equally, though, they did make interesting use of the saucer by putting in 7 shuttle bays. So it actually, you can see dotted around the width of the saucer is up to 7 shuttle bays, which is very, very impressive. As is, you can see its torpedo launchers. It has 4. So it had double the firepower. Now that's because most of its fighting was going to be at warp, so it needed considerable torpedo firepower, which it definitely had. So it was quite handy in that respect. Even if the other problem with the reactor, and really what made this ship not age so well, was that it guzzled fuel like nobody's business. It burned through antimatter like you would not believe. And so that was not dreadfully convenient, because the Klingons knew every time that Starfleet had to send one of these out to intercept them, that they could just make Starfleet waste fuel, which I'm sure gave them a rollicking good laugh, but wasn't particularly convenient for us. In any case, in the 2290s, it really started being phased out really started being demoted from that role in favour of the Excelsior, which was starting to come in. They had worked that out. But, and really, that should have been the end of the story. But, oddly enough, it persisted. And maybe, there's something to be made from that. It had very good utility. It had lots of cargo space, had lots of shuttles, and, you might think, oh, shuttles, what's the point of them? Well, you've got transporters, but you don't need them until you really need them. And this was something that the crews of the Constellation found indispensable, especially when they were sent out to go through uncharted space. Having some shuttles, expand your sensor range was really quite handy. So it really endured quite well in that respect, and arguably long past when it really should have. It saw use in the Cardassian border wars and did all right, but yeah, by the end, they're starting to be a bit long in the tooth, especially next to some of the newer stuff the Cardassians were bringing out. You were really seeing it not age well, and not the easiest ship to refit and redesign. And they had more experience of they had brought out the Cheyenne, and it did what this did, but better. So really, they felt there was no need to continue it. So it, for better or for worse, was decommissioned in the early 2360s. But it's a very interesting ship for its history and its ability to really find a very specific niche, despite its peculiar design choices. Occupied an interesting place in Starfleet during the late 23rd century, and has definitely been quite influential on four nacelle designs. Like I say, it's not bad at a first attempt, but it's still pretty visibly a first attempt. So there you have it. Thank you guys for watching. Please like and subscribe and do what you can to support this series, and let me know if you want more of these kinds of videos.